Good evening to all of you, and I hope you all had a great 4th of July weekend. And as I said in my voice announcement, the 4th in some situations was not that good because it was wet. And then if you're on the Jersey coast, I guess you're dealing with sharks down there too. My daughter just sent me an email because they're going down to Long Beach Island with her fiance, and they said, she's not going in the water because there were sharks sighted off of Avalon and Margate today. They closed the beaches down for a little bit. So as I say to people, there's no such thing as climate change, and you know, what the heck, the oceans are getting warmer and warmer. I have a place down Avalon. I've been down there for close to 20 years, and it's interesting watching especially over the last 7, 8 years, the water temperature, how it has been getting warmer and warmer. So along with that, we got Portuguese man of war and we have sharks. So anyway, I hope you had a good 4th of July. So let me tell you a couple things. I did download all your work. I'm going to take it with me. I'm heading to DC tomorrow, and I'll be back on Friday, and I'll be giving comment to all of you related to what you gave me. And tonight, when we're looking through this, chapter 6, we're basically going to look at chapter 6 out of Cresswell to help you really begin to focus on writing your chapter 1 from a qualitative point of view. And I got some examples from some of your former colleagues who have gone through dissertations and help you to begin to understand what you're moving towards. Now, at the end of this course, obviously you're not writing your dissertation, but the main focus of this is to make sure you at least have a basic understanding of the qualitative approach, you know, as we go through this process. Also, the other thing I know, I sent to you the list of your teams. And those of you who worked with me in the past, obviously, I like putting you into teams. Those teams are there because when I went through your frameworks, I looked for some commonality, particularly in terms of design, where some of you, a lot of you have done, were leaning towards phenomenology. Some of you are looking at mixed methods. I think we had grounded theory and also some question marks. So I sort of put you in those teams. Now those teams are there for you. What I'm recommending is that your teams get together and talk and share information about what you're going through, help to generate questions that the team wants to pose to me, so that you get a sense of camaraderie as you're going through this process. But I think, Jonathan, you asked the question, is this in place of your reflective journal? No, I still want you to do your reflective journal. I'm just giving you a framework so that you can collaborate and help each other learn as you're going through now it's 7 weeks of this process. So that's what those teams are there. You can utilize them. I gave you all your emails and put them together, meet however you want to. But I think it will help you greatly in sharing your angst and your concerns, or what you're learning as you're going through your own interviews, etc. So that's there for you also. So what we're going to do tonight is basically is that when you begin to look at the design of the process, I want you to make sure that you understand Drexel's chapter 1, what the one's going to look like as you go through this. And so basically the structure of chapter 1 is that you'll write about the introduction to the problem. So you started playing around with that, in this short activity I had you doing. Then we are going to do a statement of the problem to be researched. So what specifically are you looking at in terms of your research process? Then you're going to talk about the purpose and significance of the problem. Why is it an important thing to look at? What's supporting that? And I'll show you some examples of that in a couple minutes. So that will be the third part of chapter 1. And then the next one will be the research question or the questions, because you might only have one question depending on what you're doing, particularly if it's a phenomenological study. But you also will have some sub-questions, and we'll take a look at what they look like. The sub-question really in a qualitative research is really designed to take you deeper into your fundamental question in terms of collecting the data, particularly if it's through observation or if it's through interviewing individual people. Whereas in quantitative approaches, your questions are designed around hypotheses and null hypotheses. So there's a difference when you look at those. But whether you're doing a qualitative, quantitative, or mixed study, you're going to be using this framework in the Drexel dissertation. Then the next thing is your conceptual framework. So I started you out in beginning to understand that by having you do the your researcher stance. So that's where the conceptual framework comes from, and we'll talk about that in more detail as we go through the course. Then what will happen is you'll define terms, and those terms that you will define are specific to the problem where a reader might need to know what a term is. And we'll talk about that. You don't define everything. If it's generalized knowledge, you don't worry about it. But if there's specific terms, like for example, if you were doing something that was looking at situated cognition, and you were doing a study about that in relationship to how kids perceive certain types of things, so you might define what situated cognition is, or transformational play, or any terminology that is specific to that research question that a reader might not know. Now, the important thing that I want you to start getting in your head as a writer is that you're writing for the reader. So you want to make sure the reader understands what you're saying. So that becomes an extremely important component. And then you'll talk about the assumptions and the limitations of your study. Generally, you're looking at maybe a page there in relationship to that. Those things emerge when you're working with your chair, as your chair gives you some guidance in relationship to, all right, what are some of the underlying assumptions about this project, but also what are some of the limitations? And for most of you, the limitation will be the size of sample, because and a lot of times because of this EDD program, since you're really focusing in on an issue within your space, you're not doing a PhD research that has broad generalizable outcomes to it, but that in many situations you'll see as a limitation to this particular dissertation. So what I'm having you work on right now really is working on beginning to think about a problem, beginning to learn how to state that problem, and then begin to start thinking about why is it significant, and where the significance comes from is your literature review, in starting to look at the problem and then what your research questions are. So that's the focus I have you looking at right now. And then lastly, in that chapter, you'll do a short paragraph or two of the summary of chapter 1. So I don't know if you went through this process, because all of you have to write a chapter 1, 2, and 3 for 810, I believe, correct? I'm going to make the assumption that was true. So you should have gone through this already, depending on this, but I just want to reinforce this because now we're going to go into a little bit deeper from the point of view of a qualitative researcher. So any questions about this structure? Okay, so what happens then is when you look at chapter 6, really what you're talking about is the discussion of the questions. And that video I gave you this week to begin to understand what questioning technique is to help you to understand this from this point of view, is that you have a problem statement, then you have a purpose statement of, okay, yeah, all right, there's a problem. It might be discipline issues and how kids perceive discipline or how principals do discipline, or it might be coaching and in evaluation processes, et cetera. So you begin to look at this problem. Now you begin to say, well, what is the purpose? So my purpose is to hear the voice of the students who are being, disciplined. We'll just use that, since a lot of you said you want to move in phenomenology. So that would be it. So the central question then really then becomes, what is it like to experience a particular discipline problem? Then you'll have sub-questions. You might have sub-questions depending on the nature of the type of phenomenology you might do, or you might have sub-questions to take you into that question. So this is a generalizable framework for how you get to the question. And the question is extremely important in a qualitative study. So when you look at then the problems, so really the components, as Cresswell points out, is, need. So the problem is there's a need for this study. And how you're going to find out that there's a need for this study will be your review of the literature. As you begin to think about, here's what I want to look at. I'm hoping, when you did your chapters 1, 2, and 3 for 810, that obviously you did a literature review. So you began to look at, was there any gaps in that literature that said to you, maybe I want to look at this, or there might be some situations within your environment that there is a need for that study. And that's what you want to do in terms of your dissertation. So once you begin to look at that, then you begin to create the rationale, and then you write the opening paragraph. And that paragraph generally will state, why do you think it's there? And you'll state and cite some review of literature to support that. Okay? So you should have had this, and as I take you through this, that this, is kind of a review of what you did when you put together your mock dissertation in 810. So from the problem statement then, so the reasons for qualitative study, again, you want to look at this, is that, okay, I want to add to the literature. Well, in this situation, you might not add to the literature if it's a problem that is specific to your environment. What it will do is, though, it will help to see how a problem might have been addressed or solved. Now, that could be adding to the literature, or it could at least begin to get people to think about that problem within their own environments. So yeah, you do add to the literature, to the wider group, because your dissertation will be published, and that's what you're looking at. You also want to give voice to the underrepresented groups. So again, some of you, as you did your research stance, so if you looked at those different lenses, that, the underserved populations, that can become a reason for a qualitative study, particularly when you're doing phenomenological approaches where you're trying to elicit the voice of students or marginalized groups of people, etc. That becomes important. And then the other reason, as he talks about, is that you're really trying to understand the central phenomenon. So what is it? What's this event that I'm looking at? What is the phenomena taking place? So I'll show you an example of a person who was doing the phenomena of a group of emotional disturbed special ed kids who were working in a virtual reality. So the question is, how were these kids who have very difficult times in terms of interacting with other people because of their behavior within the phenomenon of a virtual reality that was based upon developing collaborative experiences? So that would be examples of a central phenomenon. Then what it does is it leads to outcomes such as stories. And for those of you who want to do a phenomenological or a narrative, story is extremely important. And when you read in Cresswell, he talks about rich narrative, rich story, deep understanding, letting that voice to emerge. And then what you can do is generate a theory, particularly, and I think one or two of you talked about doing grounded theory. So what grounded theory is, it takes the stories and then you construct a theory out of that process of why these things are happening. And then you want to look at the cultural life of a group. Again, that's more towards ethnography. As I said, none of you are going to do an ethnography because you don't have enough time. Because ethnographies take a long time to do because you got to study, the culture. You get in part of the culture. Generally, you're looking at about a year and a half to do that. And you honestly, I don't think, want to spend that much time in doing that. So that's why we discourage that type of group. And then in-depth analysis of a case, obviously, is where you want to study a particular case. So that case could be how one particular school, one building within a school district perceives teacher evaluation. And if you do multiple case studies, then you would look at that particular case and compare it to another case within that district or another district. So again, these are the reasons why you want to do qualitative research. So any thoughts, questions? Just want to make sure. So when you look at the narrative, or the introduction, then the element, as he points out, what he says is that the topic is, your topic needs to be a way that it hooks a person in. Wow, that's an interesting study. I want to look at that. So obviously, as you develop this and as you move into your writing courses, in terms of writing your dissertation and working with your chair, that topic becomes important because you're writing for an audience. You want to bring those people in. Research problem. You need to make the case that there's a need to study this problem, whatever it might be. Then you look at scholarly literature. Now, it's important that, and I think hopefully you've gone through this process in 803 and 810, is that when you're doing a dissertation and you're doing scholarly research, you need to look at peer-reviewed journals. You can use books by experts periodically, but generally what you are using is scholarly journals, not common think pieces that come out of generalized magazines or things of that nature. So in a dissertation, the focus on scholarly literature is extremely important, and generally that's from peer-reviewed journals. And then the deficiencies are the inadequacies, what's going on there, what's happening, if it's a marginalized group of kids or a marginalized group of people. So what's the approach that you're going to use to be able to address that inadequacy? And within the qualitative approach, obviously we've shown you 5, of which the ethnography we'll put off to the side. So really there's 4 approaches that you should be entertaining. And then the audience or the stakeholders, how will it benefit them? So if you're doing it for the place and where you work, which is okay to do this dissertation, how is it going to benefit the people there? Is it going to help the administration to think differently? Is it going to help kids to think or teachers to think differently? What will it do? And then the purpose statement then comes back to that. All right, after I look at all of these things, why am I doing this? What's the reason? So again, this is how you begin to structure this. Now, what I want you to think about is, and I'm going to, when I give you feedback on these, I'm going to really focus on your purpose and your rationale in why that question is there. So I really want you to look at that right now. Now, you've added a lot of other things in. Obviously, I've done a poor job in getting you guys to look at 2 pages. Some of you have got 7 pages, etc. That's okay, because what it is, you're building the stuff that's going to help you for your final project. But I want to just focus on your purpose statement, the significance, and your research question right now, because your next phase now is to go out and start interviewing. All right, so I want to make sure that you have a good sense of that. Okay? Comments, questions? So here's an example, and this is in your book, I believe. They looked at the research problems, tobacco's leading to cause of cancer, the evidence of the literature. You can see what they did. Previous research focused on 4 topics. Fewer studies examined, people not or trying to stop smoking. Deficit, minimal research on context, social context. So you're looking for the gap that's in the literature, and then the importance for the audience is to understand tobacco use in high schools, research isolated variables, et cetera, and administrators and teachers plan for intervention around teen smoking. So that just gives you a little sense. So as you look at this, and I did, you can download these slides. If you saw in the Zoom right above that, I had this set of slides there. So again, take a look at now as we go through this, when you developed what you sent me, see how it's fitting into these processes, okay? So your purpose statement, all right, it's the main object, major object, roadmap, most important statement, and you'll see a couple in a couple minutes that what he has, and then I've got some I'm going to show you from some dissertations that students in our program have done. So it's the most important statement in a qualitative study. Now, from your 803, 810, what were you told about how long a purpose statement should be? See if I can get some comments.
I think just like 2 or 3 sentences.
That's it. It's only about 2 or 3 sentences long. Now, in some dissertations, you'll make that purpose statement and you might add a couple citations to support it. But yes, you're right. It should only be about 2 or 3 sentences because it should be very succinct. It should be, as it says, he says there, clear and concise. All right, so the importance here in terms of your writing ability now is to begin to constantly focus on how is the reader going to perceive this. That becomes the important component of this. So, and again, he has a script for you. So the purpose of this phenomenological study is, to understand whatever the phenomenon is, and you can use this script. There's a basic script that is there. Now, I'm going to show you a couple purpose statements that are a little bit different from this in terms of dissertations that have been defended by your colleagues. But right now, this is the best way of writing it. So he gives you a script. Look at your purpose statement within what you've given me and see how it fits this. This is what I want you to get used to doing in terms of writing this, but your chair might want you to expand it slightly. Just want you to be aware of it. But for the purpose of this right now, in your project you're going to hand in, the final assignment is use this as the framework, okay? So the script comments identified it quite. So obviously, what's your approach? Is it going to be, it's a phenomenological approach, and then encoded focus, and you'll see this in a couple minutes, identify the central phenomenon. So again, one of the ones I'm going to show you is, I believe, though I think, if I remember the one I put in here, is that she was studying reading deficits of 7th grade kids, what it was like from a phenomenological point of view. Another study was a study on what was it like to be retained from a student's point of view in 7th grade, the middle school level. So that was a phenomenon. So you need to identify what your phenomenon is. Even a case study, you do the same thing. Any of the things you're doing is, what are you studying? What's the phenomenon? Then, foreshadow participants in the site. I'm going to do it in a middle school within a suburban school district, whatever, and then general definition of this central phenomenon. So what is it? What does, let's say, retention, what is retention? Being held back in middle school. So you'll learn to define those things, but these are the elements that are important in terms of a purpose statement. And so when he uses encoding words, these are the words. So those of you who are thinking about phenomenology, these are the words that you use. Phenomenology, describe, experience, meaning, essence. If you're doing, someone who wants to look at grounded theory, you'd say grounded theory. So you're going to generate a theory from the data from the field. You're going to develop, a proposition might emerge, a process might emerge. Case study. Remember, case study is a bounded system. So it might be one particular elementary school that is looking at the relationship between a principal and a teacher during supervision. So it's bounded. So and then the event would be relationship between the supervisory process between a teacher and a principal. So what you want to start looking at is okay, if I'm going to do what you read in chapter 5, these are the types of languages or the coded words that you use for that type of study. And again, as I said to you, a lot of you, I think 5 or 6 of you said you're looking at phenomenology. So these are the types of words I'll be looking for. One of you said, I think it was one of you said grounded theory, and then we had a couple state case study. Now we said mixed. A couple of you want to do a mixed study. That's fine, but you need to define the qualitative side of the mixed study. So am I going to use a case study, or am I going to use a phenomenological approach, or am I going to use a narrative to allow a story to emerge? So again, get used to the language for each one of these basically 4, even though eventually down the road, if you want to do an ethnography, that's the language you use there. Okay? Comments, questions? I must be doing a great job. Clear. Just want to make sure, that you understand this process. Okay, so here's a narrative. You can look at that. So the author describes and analyzes the process of eliciting the life history of a man with mental retardation. So that's a purpose statement. So you know it's going to be narrative because the author describes and they're going to analyze this story of an individual person with mental retardation. And so in this particular study, now, we might not use the word mental retardation anymore because if you notice that study was 1994. So again, mental retardation was a common word. It might be different, but my point is that when you read that you're going to get a single narrative, and that study is going to be on one person because you can do a narrative on one person. So that's a narrative. So when you look at a phenomenological, so the present study was designed to explore beliefs, attitudes, and needs the current and expected adolescent fathers and young men who are fathers of children born to adolescent mothers have regarding their role as father. So you're looking at young fathers. And so this study is looking at how these human beings believe in their attitudes towards fatherhood. So the phenomenon is fatherhood, where you're looking at the individual as a father to get them to tell you what they experience. All right? So that would be an example of phenomenological purpose statement. Grounded theory, so one or two of you are looking at that. So the purpose of study was to understand processes a person experiences in creating a leadership identity. And so from that, what will emerge is a theory about leadership from this particular study. So you can see how succinct that statement is, and you know that it's going to be grounded theory because you're trying to understand a process that this person experienced so that you're going to create a theory about leadership identity. So you think about theory U, And what Theory U and when Otto Scharmer was always talking about the source of leadership, you can begin to utilize that as a framework for doing this type of study. Okay? And then case study. So again, and particularly those of you who are going to do a mixed study, a lot of times you will do a case study part of that. So what you're really looking at is the purpose of this study was to describe the ways in which 3 urban elementary schools, in partner with a local publicly funded multi-purpose universities, use similar array of material and human resources to improve their integration of technology. So what you are studying here are how 3 schools worked with a university to help develop the integration of technology within those elementary buildings. So you're going to look at how the common interaction with that university, how these 3 buildings then integrated technology. So that would be a purpose and statement in terms of case study. Now, what I'm going to do is, here is a blank screen, which, here's a purpose study. I'll give you a couple minutes to take a look at that. So what's the phenomenon being studied here?
Would it be virtual learning?
Yeah, virtual learning. So purpose of study is to understand the experiences of students with EBD as they use this phenomenon called virtual learning environment as their primary learning environment. So in this particular case, the study was looking at a virtual learning environment that was called Quest Atlantis. And it was it's a virtual learning environment that has about 28,000 kids around the world involved in, and it is a totally functional class that integrates writing, science, mathematics, and social responsibility in all types of quests. So, and what's the research methodology?
Phenomenological.
Yep. So, but a particular type of phenomenological, I like that. That's good. Phenomenological. Got to do it quick. So, those of you who are, and remember, IPA does not mean that liquid stuff, because every time people look at that, those of you who are beer drinkers understand that that's a form of beer. It's not. We're talking about interpretive phenomenological analysis. So it is a particular type of phenomenology that is used. So what you're seeing here is, so this purpose statement, but if you notice, this purpose statement brought in some support. So Foster, now it's kind of interesting. Foster, those of you might run into him because he's one of our faculty members. Arudis Foster wrote a thing about virtual reality. So this person used this study to bolster their purpose. And then when you looked in the second paragraph, you can see how they saying that a particular type of interpretive phenomenological analysis by Smith, Flowers, and Larkin. So, and then Quest Atlantis, to give a little bit of the purpose of what the phenomenon is, it's Quest Atlantis, so it was supported by that group of researchers. So this was one that goes a little bit deeper into understanding what the study is. Now here's another one. I think, there we go. So take a look at this one. So what's the phenomenon being studied here? Obviously, it's in the beginning.
Instructional coaching.
Okay, yeah. So the phenomenon looking at here is this, and the study is what type of study?
Explanatory mixed methods.
Yeah, it's explanatory mixed method, which is, again, you're getting overviews of some of these particular qualitative approaches that we're looking at. So an explanatory mixed method study basically is looking at where the qualitative part is enhanced through the quantitative data. And so in this particular study, and this was a student who just, I was the chair, and he just defended his dissertation. And what basically he was doing then is that to understand the teacher perceptions as he has it there, what he did was use a phenomenological approach as the qualitative mixed study, and then he did descriptive and quantitative analysis from his survey data. So again, when you read this, you have a pretty good idea. Well, it's a mixed study. We know what the phenomenon is, and here's how I was going to do, the correlation between this. And then the second study reports, he talks about how the qualitative or quantitative material is going to enhance that qualitative interviewing that he did. So that's another example. Now here's one. So when you look at those two, so qualitative research questioning now what we want to start going in is to, most of the time, you're going to use open-ended questioning. So when you do your interview, now again, and I know one of you, I forget who asked me, said, well, I'm going to do surveying, do coding. No, I don't. I want you to do interviews, because, and even though you might, it's such a pain to do, but I want you to experience it, because I'm going to guarantee you that when you do, even in a mixed study, unless you do pure quantitative, when you do your qualitative, you're going to do interviewing. And when you do interviewing, to analyze that data, you must do coding. And what coding is, taking the verbatim transcript and then analyzing it. And that's, you've been reading in Soldera's book, and we'll go into it in more detail down the road, is how do you create the codes, which then leads to the themes that bring together, what this person is saying or the group of people are saying. So what you're going to do is you're going to use open-ended question. And now, if you remember, go back to 625, when I had you do that leadership interview. That's what we're talking about, open-ended, where what you're doing is you're allowing the emergence of that person's voice to lead the conversation, because then you understand what's going on. So one of the reasons I had you do that Otto Scharmer interview process was to get you used to beginning to understand how you need, as a researcher, to bracket your assumptions as you're listening to a person. So you go back to 625 and remember how to do a bracketing so that you can hear what the person is saying. Because as a researcher, particularly those of you who are going to do phenomenology, one of the most interesting things about a phenomenological study, particularly if you do a hermeneutic approach, is that what will happen once you do the bracketing, once you do the coding, once you tell the story, then you become part of the research, and then your experience then interacts with that data. So what's interesting about phenomenology and a lot of qualitative research is that as a researcher, you become part of it once you've been able to collect the data, and then when you do your analysis, now your experiences interact with it. Because when you're doing qualitative research, really what happens here, and the main difference between qualitative and quantitative research is that you're controlling variables, and you are, as the researcher, outside. So you stay neutral, where in qualitative research, you are part of it. And that's why bracketing is important, and that's why I want you to do interviewing again, so that you can get back into that mode of turning off your own downloading so that you can hear what the person's saying. Okay, so that's important when you begin to look at the research questions as you're doing this. So you always start what and how. You're doing really, tell me about yourself, you know, how, if you can remember back into 625, how did you do that question? But the difference here will be, really it's not that much, but remember, it's your central question. So if I'm doing phenomenology, like in that one study, so tell me what it's like to experience your Quest Atlantis environment. And then you let them go. And then you follow, you listen. So you're not saying, oh, well, that's kind of silly. Yeah, I want to take them in this direction. No, you let them go, and then it becomes a conversation. If you remember, and a lot of you remember, you even said to me, it was really difficult doing that, but to be a good researcher in qualitative, you know you have to learn how to do this, okay? So what I want you to start concentrating on is that as I look through most of your studies, that what you're looking at, you're in the right direction. So you can start now formulating, who am I going to interview? Again, 15, 20 minutes, because what the real outcome of this is that I want you to experience in coding. So I don't want you to interview 10 people and then have to do, 100 pages of transcripts because they're verbatim. So I just want you to do a simple interview, collect the data, transcribe it, and look at it. All right? So with that then, so what you do is your research questions, again, should be wide open, encoded in the language of the five approaches that you're looking at. He has a lot of that in the book, and I'll help you through that process. So what happens is then the elements of the central question, what's the central phenomenon? Who are the participants? The site, where is it going to take place? And the approach to it. So with the central phenomenon, now, for example, in that particular one I showed you, that site where it took place was an online school in Western Canada who used Quest Atlantis as a primary learning environment for them. In that other one that I showed you, the site was a high school in central Pennsylvania. So again, when you get into writing your final project, you're going to talk about, okay, here's the phenomena, here's the participants who are going to be involved in this, here's where it's going to take place, and here's the approach I'm going to use to the inquiry, meaning my research design. So these are the key elements that will allow your central questions to emerge. So comments, questions. So far, you got a sense of this? Or you're still, okay, good.
So, Dr. Gould, I did my, this is Linda. Let me put my, so I did my interview last week only because I'm traveling this week.
Yes, okay.
It ended up to be 38 minutes, believe it or not. I just could not, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I just could not shut this person up.
That's fine. That's good. So you got a lot of transcribing to do.
Yeah, I do, unfortunately. But it was, what was hard for me was I didn't want to stop her. So, to interject with, more questions and whatnot, she kept going on and on and on. So I thought it would be easier than it was. And it was very difficult. So it was an exercise.
So, but you don't have to worry about your data then, meaning you got a lot there.
Oh, yeah.
You just have a lot of transcribing to do and then getting into coding, but there should be a lot of rich data there for you.
What was interesting was as she was talking, and I was kind of drifting a little bit in my mind, only thinking about coding. So I'm thinking, oh, there's a code word. Oh, there's a code word. So it was interesting.
Yeah, okay, now that's good. Yeah, all right, so you're actively coding. what I'm going to tell most of you, try not to do that.
I know.
Because what it's going to do is like you said, I started drifting, so you're not going to hear what they're saying. Now, hopefully, obviously, you're recording it, so you can drift.
Yes, I did
because you
record.
go back and listen to it. So, but yeah, that's again, it sounds easy to do an interview, but it's not easy to do a research interview. And I remember I told you guys that in 625. I mean, normally, okay, I'm going to ask questions. And even some of you experienced that when you were interviewing that individual because they had an assumption, okay, just ask me a question. All right, ask me the next question. What's your next question? No, because that's focused on you. What you want to do is let the voice from that individual emerge around the phenomenon that you're looking at, okay? So again, it's okay, just do it. And then that's why I want you and your teams to share that information with each other. And then when we get back together again, then, I want you to talk about that for everybody. Because to me, that's the important thing, okay?
I think, Dr. Gould, too, it's important, that whole Sharma thing of suspending the voice of judgment when you're doing the interview, because I find even just as I'm thinking about doing this, when I hear my faculty talk, that I want to take part in it more than I should.
Yep, that's the key. Seriously, that's the key. As I said to you back then, and good, I'm glad you're thinking about that, because, if you don't do that, then you're really not allowing that individual's voice to emerge, and then you're imposing yours. Now, what's important about this, though, if you learn to control that, see, then you, as the researcher, can add your stuff in when you're doing the analysis. So, for example, a teacher says, blah, 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 then you can write in, now, but based on my experience as whatever it is, here's what I'm finding. So that adds to the richness of your of your analysis. And then when you get into your discussion, it becomes even better. So that's what I just want you to get used to, because again, I said it in 625, I'm going to say it here. This ain't easy, folks. It's hard because our own tendency is we constantly want to put our point of view into the mix. And as a researcher, you cannot do that. All right, so this is your practice field, to deal with that. And then we'll talk about this a couple weeks down when we talk about what was it like, so you can begin to explore that. But more importantly, I want you in those groups, to talk to each other about it, so that you can build that little learning space for yourselves.
So, Dr. Gould, you're saying to go ahead and do the interview before we don't have to wait to get the paper back to see what you thought about our process?
No, I'll make comments on your research question, etc. But what I've seen in here, basically, all of you have it. What your problem is, and what you're trying to look at. It's all there. Now, if it's some of them are written well enough that, yeah, that's there. Others I was able to tease out, but every one that I've read here is okay, and start collecting your data. Okay? That's what I'm saying to all of you.
Okay, good. So right now, just collect the data. We shouldn't be moving into like coding it and finding.
No. You need to do the transcription, because what I'll do is next week, you'll have a couple videos on how to do coding. Okay?
Okay, great.
And then you'll be, and basically you're doing in vivo coding. So if you look at Johnny Saldana's book, and most of you, my suggestion is there's two types of coding. All right, since we're talking about coding, there'll be two types you're going to do. One will be, large coding. So you're going to look at a whole paragraph and draw something out of that. Some of you might want to do it line by line. Okay? Now, have you ever seen a legal document? What's a legal document look like? It's line.
Boring.
Yeah, well, I'm talking about the structure of it, not the content. What it does is it goes down the side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, numbers, right? So each line has a number to it. So if you do line by line coding and you put together a code book, that's how you do line by line coding. So a legal document, to one extent, that's done that way is really a coded process. So it's just one I want you to look at. Now, some of you, as you begin to write your study, might want to move the interview to some specific questions. So I'm going to tell you right now, if you're doing a qualitative approach, you're not doing one interview. You're going to do 2 or 3 at least. And what you'll do is that, so let's say you have 2 sub-questions, that then those, you might have 3 interviews, one general one to get a general context of the person, who they are, how they feel, etc. Then the next 2 might be focused on a sub-question. So you have open-ended questions around the sub-questions, and you'll see that right now. But again, the sub-questions then subdivide the central question. Now, in that one with the VR, no, it didn't, because all they were looking for was trying to understand the experience of these kids, because there's very little research on the use of virtual reality with that group of kids. And any of you are special ed teachers or administrators or have emotional support in a building, you should understand why I'm saying that. Because those kids, a lot of times, is that the behavioral problems are so severe that they interfere with their cognitive development, even though many of those kids are quite bright. So that's central question. Now the other one, and I think I'll show you the question that he had. He had 2 sub-questions that lend themselves to 2 different types of interviews that would lead to a better understanding of his primary question. Okay, so we'll talk about that. You'll read about that a little bit more. But all I want you to focus on in this particular project right now is just your primary question. And then you might begin to say, as I look through this, since that person won 28 minutes, there's probably some sub-questions that would have, emerged out of that, as you think going forward. So I just want you to think about that. 5 to 7 sub-questions for most of our dissertations, 3. Okay? Because because the nature of this EDD and the time you have, to go into 7 sub-questions, that would be too many. So the most sub-questions you most likely will have will be probably 3 at the most. Okay? But then again, that's your negotiation with your chair as you go through that question. So again, a narrative, so the sub-questions in a narrative probe the meaning of the story a little bit more, go a little bit deeper into it. So there you might have 3 interviews with that individual. And each interview goes a little deeper, and the sub-questions bring it there. Phenomenology establishes the components of the essence. Do you go deeper into this thing? Grounded theory, details of emerging theory, as you're pulling this information from the field, what other questions need to go in there to bring that information out so I can develop a theory out of it. Ethnography, we're going to ignore right now. Case study, address the elements of the case or the issues. And you'll see that in a minute. Okay, so there's the sub-questions. Again, this is in chapter 6 for you. So here's some samples. So take a look at this one. So we have so this is the one who was doing explanatory mixed study. And then what he was really looking at is, how does the classroom perceive instructional coaching? So the quantitative side of this was from data that was collected in a survey, a descriptive survey about this. His qualitative side of this were to look at that, then he created conversations and interviews around these particular areas here. So he wanted to find that out. So he was collecting data in a quantitative that allowed all these questions to be answered, but when he got into his phenomenological side, he used these as to go deeper into understanding the experience of a teacher and the experience of a principal. So that's one example. Here's one, very simple one. This was one question. So this research question, this phenomenological study, designed to answer the following question. What characterizes the experience of students with EBD as they participate in a virtual learning environment? Simple question. That's what it is. So all the stories that came out of those kids, and there were 4 students that were interviewed, and there were 4 very rich narrative stories that emerged from these kids and the researcher was able to, because they were a teacher of these kids, able to then utilize their experience to help shape or to explain that story. As the researcher interacting with this, codes and themes emerged out of that. So there's a simple one. And here is one other one. So just by that first sentence there, this study was designed to give voice. What's the research design? Possibly 2. Give voice to the participants. What could be the 2 research designs? I'm not answering it. Now think about it.
My screen is frozen. So, I'm like, stuck.
Okay. So what would it be? So if you're going to give voice to the participants, what's one of the major ones that will give voice? Several of you said that.
Narrative.
Well, narrative's one, but several of you said you want to do what?
Phenomenology.
Thank you very much, phenomenology. So this was a phenomenological study. So what it is, so that question was what characterizes the experiences and responses. So experiences and responses are those encoded words that you're looking for. So remember that chart. So here's the following questions to help the participants to go deeper into that. So what she did was she then had a series of interviews that focused on getting more and more of their experiences around those 3 sub-questions. So this helps to give you a sense. Now, I need to send these to you because that I did not have in the handout that I put in there. What I will do is, if you didn't download that, or if you did, disregard it, I will copy this one and put that in to week 3, and this will have these examples in if you so desire to have them. Okay? So there's the sample. Here's another one. Yeah, here's another one. So again, this is one that dealt with retained middle school kids, phenomenology, because again, experience and responses. Now, it could be a narrative, but this one was phenomenology, and then here's the final questions that go deeper into their own experiences. Here they were. What's the impact of grade retention? What's the overall perception do retained students have about their education? And then lastly, what do retained students think about learning within the current school system? Because what she was looking at, particularly in her recommendations, was to get teachers and administrators to hear the voice and to begin to understand how these kids look at a school. Because a lot of times there's not much literature about that. So basically then, do you have any questions up to this point? You know, you have a pretty good idea on purpose statement, problem statement, how to put the questions together, and some sub-questions. At least enough to begin to play around with what you sent me. I'll give you some feedback on it. But most of you, at least, you know, where you're going with the direction of it is okay. Some of you have to, you know, write it a little bit differently, but that's all right now. Most of you know what you're doing.
Quick question.
Yes.
Exploratory versus explanatory. Is explanatory where we already have some understanding as to why the phenomena is, but we're explaining why it is, and exploratory is we're not sure why it is a phenomena, so we're looking for those reasons.
Yeah, you're looking at it in what's well, really what happens in phenomenology. So, for example, interpretive phenomenological analysis, which is now becoming a major, player in the educational field. A lot of my students have done that, and that came out of the medical field, particularly nursing. So if you guys go into the Drexel dissertations, and you go into school of nursing, you're going to see a lot of phenomenological studies. And the reason for that is, what it does is the explanatory is, all right, we're explaining from the point of view. Whereas when you look at exploring, again, it's nuance approaches. And so, for example, if you're using a hermeneutic approach and you use Van Man, now I'm going to throw words out at you, and I think I gave you some of the if you look at some of the research and you look at those initial videos, those short videos, Van Man is one of the leading phenomenologists that deal with education and teaching. So he wants the voice to emerge. Again, when you do phenomenology, if you read those 5 approaches, you need to understand the philosophical background. So you need to understand Heidegger. You need to understand Sartre. So phenomenology comes out of philosophy. Now, that exploratory mixed method, that is a specific research methodology that comes out of mixed method. And what I would suggest is you go back to your book, and you use Cresswell in 803, 810. Go into that and look under the mixed method approach and look at how they define that. Or better, just Google those two, exploratory, and it will give you a pretty good understanding of what it is.
Okay, thank you.
Okay? Any other questions? So your next step now is to do what?
Interviews and transcribe them.
Yeah. Start your interviews, but make sure, and if excuse me, if you want, you can send me your list of questions to give you feedback on them, because you want them open-ended. You don't need to, but if I'm not really sure, if you want to do that, you can do it. Now, I will look at them in the evening when I'm down in DC, and I'll try to give you some feedback on those right away. But again, go back to 625, go back to, hopefully you still have that handout that I gave you for the Charmer. That will give you a pretty good idea on how to construct those questions. You want them open-ended? And read Miriam's chapter on questions, and also here are pretty good. So I think you guys should be able to handle this, well from just what you're reading there.
Dr. Gould, my questions I submitted with the paper as part of the interview protocol. Should I resend them to you, or just wait to hear from you?
No, you have them in there, and based off of what I said tonight, if you think they're going to work for you, use them.
Yeah, I mean, I do, but of course you're the expert.
Well, but I'm just saying, based on what I said to you tonight, do you feel that?
Yeah,
that
I do.
ballpark?
No, I do. I'm a little nervous that I'll be in the same boat as Linda, that I'll end up with, a lot more minutes to transcribe than I thought I would, but that's okay. That gives me more data to work with.
Yeah. Or just tell the person to keep quiet.
Yeah, just tell them to stop talking.
Stop talking. This interview's over. No, again, judge yourself because, you got to be careful of that because if you want to do it. But I want you to transcribe those things. So that's going to be the key for you. And I'm trying not to, do, 5-6 hours worth of transcription. Trying to keep this so that you get a feel for what this is like.
So Dr. Gould, did I understand you correctly? Is it one interview so that we can get practice with transcribing and coding? Just one? Yeah,
just do one.
Okay, bless you.
Yeah, because if you can do one, you can do 10. So that's what I'm trying to get you, experience it. And then, as we get into, because once you put your codes together, then the next step's going to be, okay, what themes emerge out of this? Now, again, it's limited. We know it's limited, but it's just to get you used to this because this is what you're going to have to do down the road. Okay? So if there are no more questions, then I'm going to say, good night to you. I'll be the last person on. I'm going to stop the recording at this point, and I just want to make sure, so if anyone, I know a couple people could not make it.